Hi, it's me, Crystal. So today I thought it would be fun to do the no disclaimers book tag. I first saw this on Murphy's channel, so I will link that video below. There are 8 questions, so let's just get started. But before we get started, I realized that I am off center. I also realized that my phone is probably tilted at an angle, and I also realized that my hair is also not even. And I have OCD, and I realize that other people probably have OCD, so if this bothers you, it's like, I understand, but I'm not gonna fix it. Alright, so question 1 is, which trope in books annoys you the most? This has been the same since I was 13 years old. I hate love triangles. I think they are a waste of my time. I think they are bold-faced lies because I think the author always knows going into the book who the endgame person is, and then the other person is just dragged through the mud for manufactured drama reasons, and I don't think that that is nice. And I've already gone off on a lot of tangents about the love triangle in Hunger Games and how unnecessary it was, and I actually loved Peeta, okay? But, like, obviously, was a bigger fan of Gel, and I'm just like, it was just so unnecessary. If you didn't want her to end up with Gel, then just don't do that to him. I just felt like she was just trying to drag his name through the mud and turn him into a villain, so we'd be okay with her being with Peeta, and we all would have been okay with her being with Peeta because Peeta was great if she had just, like, not done that in the first place, and it was just so unnecessary. And don't tell me that Katniss didn't know who she wanted to be, but she knew she didn't want to be with Gel, okay? Nobody is that confused in real life. And I've already talked about it, and I just really hate love triangles. And if I know going into the book that there is a love triangle, I'm not going to read that book. But if I don't know and then a love triangle pops up, most of the time I will just suffer through it. But I really, really hate them, and there is no other trope in the world that I hate more than that one. Moving on. So question 2 is, which writer or writers do you feel is overrated or overhyped? I think this is really subjective, and I think it's going to vary a lot from person to person. I definitely have read some books that I thought were probably a little overhyped, and so the author is probably overhyped by proxy. And I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who I think is overrated or overhyped. If I don't like something, I just don't like something, and I'm more likely to interpret that as this author is just not for me and this book is just not for me, rather than interpreting it as this author or this book or this book is overhyped or overrated. But just to answer the question, instead of like just evading the question by answering but not answering, you know, I read this book called Paper Princess by an author duo who write under the name Aaron Watt. That book was overrated. I don't know if I think the authors are overrated. That book was very, very entertaining. But oh my gosh, I don't know if I've ever been so mad at the way a book ended in my life. And I don't think that was like a high quality book, but it was very, very entertaining. So I don't really think the writers are overrated, but that book was definitely overrated and overhyped, you know? Question 3, what are your least favorite books you've read since joining BookTube? So I'm going to open Goodreads and go through the books that I've rated 2 stars since I've been making bookish videos. So I started making videos in 2017. So since then, the first book I see that I've given 2 stars to was The Time Weaver by Shauna Abe. I called this a, what did I call this? A fantasy romance with tacky dragon wallpaper. I stand by that, and 2 stars is too high for this book, but this is the rating system that I'm on right now. If I hate it, I give it 2 stars. If I hate it so much I can't finish it, I just DNF it. So I did finish this book. I had to bribe myself with episodes of The Office. Yeah, that was last year. That was January of last year. And then, let me see. I gave 2 stars to Rhapsodic by Laura Thalassa. This was a paranormal romance. I thought it was just a regular paranormal book. If I had known it was paranormal romance, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. Hated this. I gave 2 stars to The Holo Girl by Hilary Monahan. And Hilary Monahan is not an author I ever want to read a book from ever again. She did a couple of things that really pissed me off. And I don't want to talk about it. But this is a paranormal book. It is a terrible paranormal book. And it makes a lot of promises in the blurb and then delivers on none of them. So I read that February 2018. And then I also, in February 2018, I gave 2 stars to Love Your Life, Not Theirs by Rachel Cruz. This is a nonfiction book. Rachel Cruz is talking about money habits. I think if you've read any Dave Ramsey book, Dave Ramsey is her dad, if you didn't know. I think if you've read any of Dave Ramsey's books, then reading any of Rachel's books is just like unnecessary unless you like eating vomit. And then I gave 2 stars to The Kingdom by Jess Rotenberg. And this happened in April 2019. I actually think this is the only book that I've given 2 stars to that I would very happily recommend to other people. Basically, the book is YA sci-fi, and I don't like sentient AI, okay? So I don't like artificial intelligence that thinks that it's a real thing. I feel like if you have an off button, you're not real. And I get really, really agitated when AI starts thinking and starts wanting basic human rights. I just feel like it's a really bad idea to program them that way. And I think it's a really bad idea. And I get really, really pissed, okay? When I realized that the book was going there. And I did read all the way to the end. But it just made me very, very angry. It made me so angry. But I think if you like sentient AI, I thought the writing was really good. I thought the story was really interesting. But it just hit a nerve, okay? It hit a nerve and I hated it, so I gave it 2 stars. But I actually think that if you like sentient AI or if you're interested in reading the book with sentient AI, I actually do recommend that book because the writing was good. Like I said, it was very interesting. And if you like stuff like that, I do think you will like it. So the next book I've given 2 stars to was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I read this last May and I hated it. It's a nonfiction book. It's a memoir. She's talking about this abusive relationship that she was in, and I felt like the information was like, I think the topic is a topic that should be discussed, but I don't think she was the right person to do it. She did it in a very pretentious, annoying way, and I wanted to DNF that book almost the whole time I was reading it. And then I gave 2 stars to this picture book version of The Nightmare Before Christmas. I have 2 other versions of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and like a shorter form that I love, but I did not like this one. This one is by Alessandro Ferrari. Hated it. The vibe, the whole energy, everything was just so off. Oh, and I read that picture book at the end of 2020, and then I read it around Christmas time. And then the last book that I've given 2 stars to since I've been making bookish videos is Handsome Death by Sarah Debbie Bauer. This is an author that whose other books I really like. I just really hated this one. It was basically a contemporary book with tacky vampire wallpaper. I read this last September, and yeah, I hated it. So, question 4. What is a terrible ending that ruined an otherwise quality book? I'm tempted to say November 9 by Colleen Hoover. That's literally the first book that comes to mind. I actually thought about that book too when I was talking about Paper Princess by Anna Watt, because I read them back to back. I read November 9 and then I read Paper Princess, and I hated both of them largely because of the ending. Like Paper Princess, when I was reading November 9, and I don't like a lot of contemporary romance, you know, but I was having fun with the book. I thought it was interesting. It was entertaining. I was enjoying reading it. I wanted to know what everybody's secrets were. And then we get to the ending, and I just didn't like the way it was handled. I just feel like if you're going to be a snoop, you snoop all the way. You don't half snoop. Okay? And it just felt manufactured. I don't like it when it feels like an author is doing something just to make the story longer or just to drag some drama out. It's kind of like this this girl was going through this guy's things. I'm like, if you want to read his book so bad, then just read it. Like, don't read like 2 pages and then see something you don't like and then pitch a big toddler-sized fit about it. It just really, really pissed me off, okay? But obviously I gave that book 3 stars because I have read that since I've been making bookish videos, and it was not on the list of 2-star books. That was generous of me. But I did like the book until we got to the end. And then I was just really, really mad. Mainly at the girl and how she was acting about everything. And I'm just kind of of the mindset that if you claim you love somebody, you listen to what they have to say, even if you don't want to, even if you then later want to throw, you know, the guy's book at him and storm off, you at least hear the guy out. You don't wait like a year or 2 to like hear his side of the story. It was just so rude, and also just snooping through writer stuff is rude in general. And I obviously have written a lot of books, so I have a personal, like, I get really pissed off when people mess with a writer's writing, okay, in a book. Okay, like, don't even get me started on Little Women. I still hate Amy, but I am trying to change my mind about her because people have made an argument about how she's better for Lori than Joe, and I'm like, I am willing to watch the movie again and try to look at it with different eyes and stop wanting her to die. So it wasn't the ending of November 9 that pissed me off. It was, you know, the end of, you know, the rose-colored glasses part of the book, of the happy romance part of the book. Like, it was a fight. It was the big fight, the big obligatory fight scene that happens in all contemporary romance books and movies, okay? And then I didn't even care about the ending because I was still so mad about it. But anyway, what question am I on? Question 5. Which fictional character or characters do you wish were not killed off? I mean, I don't read a lot of books where the characters die. But speaking of Hunger Games, since I've already mentioned it, I was really unhappy about Finnick. Okay? I really liked Finnick. I mean, he really grew on me. I just really felt like he was an asset to the story. I just thought that was really sad. And obviously, if we're going to talk about Harry Potter, I don't know why Dobby had to die. Okay. And there are some other characters I could gripe about in Harry Potter who died. And I understand you have to have stakes and everything, but sometimes it's just not fair. Okay. And I really don't appreciate twins being separated like that either. It was just, somebody else could have died. That's going to make me cry. So moving on. Question 6. What are some of your bookish pet peeves? What do you mean? The first thing that comes to mind is like when, I'm going to say like unnecessary words. I talked about this a couple of times, but it's like, and it's I feel like the best way I can explain it is to just give you an example, okay? So it's like when you're reading a book and like instead of saying there's a knock on the door and, you know, Mary goes to open the door and so-and-so is standing on the porch. Instead of saying that, it goes, there's a knock on the door. Mary puts her book down. Mary stands up. Mary walks to the door. She grabs the knob. She opens the door. And I'm just like, oh my God, just say he walks over to the door, okay? And I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but it's tedious. It is so, so tedious to be reading a book and they are describing every single thing that the character is doing. If the character was sitting down reading the book and somebody comes to the door, I'm going to assume the character stands up and walks to the door. You don't have to say that they stand up, like it's implied. Like you do not have to say that they grab the doorknob. It's implied that they grab the doorknob if they open the door. And I'm like, the only time you mention them grabbing the doorknob is if they grab the doorknob and then they take a deep breath because they don't want to answer the door because they know who it is. Okay? And so it's kind of like, if they're just going to go over to the door and throw it open, you don't have to describe every single step they're taking. You only say those if they're like meaningful in some way. And it was really pisses me off, and it makes this book like really, really long, and it reads heavy and it feels like a burden, okay? And I hate it. And it's one of the things in books I hate the most when I see it. Okay? I hate it so much. So much. Question 7. What are some books you feel should have more recognition? I mean, I feel like a lot of people talked about Bunny by Monahan, but I'm always happy to talk about it again. Monahan is my favorite author, okay? And I just feel like if you are a true Monahan fan, you should also read 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, but don't read it if you take life too seriously. I thought that book was hilarious, and I thought it was genius, and I think Monahan is a literary genius. But if you take life too seriously, you're not going to enjoy that book. But I thought it was great. And I just feel like everybody talks about Bunny, but nobody talks about 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl. And I just think the book is really, really interesting. And it's not about you. It's about the character, okay? And I think more people should read that book and just, you know, read it and, like, process it. And I just think it's really funny. And it's also really interesting. And it's really sad. And I would have loved to have, like, read that in a literature class and, like, had a discussion about it, you know, when I was in college. If you don't know, 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl by Monahan, it's very different from kind of, like, what she's writing now. Like, Bunny and All's Well are, like, you know, this kind of dark, fairy tale-like literary horror. 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl is very much a contemporary book, like a contemporary slice of life book. And another book I feel like should have more recognition is Unlocked by Margot Kelly. It's right there. Okay, it is so good. It's a contemporary book, but it has supernatural elements and elements of, like, a mysticism and horror, and it is really, really good. Okay, it's about this girl, and she goes to this carnival, and she's part of this hypnosis act, and afterwards, she's, like, seeing strange things. She's, like, waking up, like, covered in dirt, and, like, there are, like, holes in her memory, and it's so good. Okay, it's, like, a mystery, it's, like, horror, and those supernatural elements just, like, really elevate it, you know? And it's, like, one of my favorite YA books, and I really think more people should read it. Okay, I want more people to read that book. It's so good. And question 8, last question, is what are your thoughts on censorship and banning books? This is really interesting because we were just talking about this today at work. And me and my uncle were kind of of the mindset that, at least in America, burning books isn't going to do anything. In fact, I think the more you try to ban something, the more you try to censor something, and the more you talk about the books that you're burning, the more likely you are to encourage other people to pick up those books. And so I don't feel like in the modern age in this country that burning books does anything. At the same time, there was a point in time in history where burning books did keep information from people, but now if you burn a book and somebody's like, oh my gosh, they were burning this book, why were they burning it? I want to read it now. They can get that book from the library, they can find it online, they can find it on audiobook, they can find that book in a bookstore. Like, you cannot keep people from reading these books in this country in this modern age. You know? And so while I am 100% not a fan of banning books or censorship in general, I don't think it's a big deal when people try to ban books or censor books or burn books even, because I don't think it does anything. Okay? In fact, I think it encourages more attention on that author. Like, if you look at, like, when the Twitter mobs get after an author on Twitter, if you've noticed, if it's like an established author, that author's sales go up 100% of the time. Because I am in the mindset that all press is press. And so even like those 2-star books I mentioned, there's still going to be somebody who's like, actually, that book sounds really good. And they're going to go and read it. And even though I told them that I thought the book sucked. Okay? So it's like, even when you're talking negatively about a book, it's still press, and all press sells books. Okay? Negative press sells books just as much as positive press. In fact, negative press might actually sell more books than positive press. So on one hand, I'm kind of a fan of people who are trying to ban and censor books and burn books. I'm a huge fan of them talking about it. I want them to talk about it, because the more they talk about it, the more attention those books are going to read, and the more likely they are to get read. I'm of the mindset that if you feel like an author is behaving badly, the best thing you can do is shut up. You know, and I know people really want to talk about it, and they're like, but I want to tell people that I don't support this author, or I want to tell people that I think this author is behaving badly. But you're talking about the author, and that's the problem. That's free press for the author. So I feel like the best thing you can do if you feel like an author is behaving badly is to not talk about them at all, because then you're not giving them any press. And I know it's really hard for people, but I'm like, this is what friends and family are for. This is what you talk about in private. You don't go shouting it out the top of your lungs online where everybody can hear it, because then you're giving that author free press, and their sales, like I said, go up 100% of the time. So in a nutshell, I am not a fan of banning books or censoring books or burning books. But I am a fan of people talking about it. So if you know of a book that's being banned or censored, talk about it. Tell everybody. And if you don't want somebody to read a book, don't ever talk about it, because then people don't hear about it. And then, you know, you don't boost an author's sales when, you know, accidentally. Or when that is not the result that you're personally wanting, you know? Okay, anyway, that's all for this video. And I thought it was fun. So, yeah. Share your thoughts below on any of these prompts. Specifically, what are your thoughts on censorship and book burning and book banning? You know, because while I find the thought behind it deplorable, I am such a big fan of them talking about it and talking about why they're doing it, you know? But you may feel differently. You may feel like all censorship and all book banning and all book burning should just like never, ever, ever happen. And yeah, we were literally talking about it at work today. So I just find the topic interesting. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this book tag. So yeah, let me know if you have thoughts on any of the questions. Let me know how you're doing. And I will see you guys next week. Yes, I will see you guys next week. And that is all for this video. Bye.